Nick Diaz Army represent. We have the UFC debut of Cesar Gracie Jiu-Jitsu's own Chelsea Chandler, repping the 209 for Chandler. She's on a 4-fight win streak. She lost her pro debut. She's going to be taking on Julija Stoliarenko, who was previously 0-4 in the UFC. She got a first round armbar win very quickly over Jessica Rose Clark. Her last time out, she had become a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt back in November of last year. Did Stoliarenko. You know her as being a fighter from the art of 9 limbs. She had Lethwei experience. She has Saiza experience over in Japan. She was on The Ultimate Fighter. She really does have one of the strangest skill sets to translate into MMA.
Have you ever met anybody, sorry, who's gone like, hey, do you know what I do on the weekends? I do Lethwei. Like, I know people who do jiu-jitsu. I know people who box in their spare time. I've never met anyone who's like, I love headbutting people on every, Sunday.
Just watching Zidane highlights, getting excited about MMA. But for Julija, that really is her base. That's where her bread gets buttered. Her striking very much is car crash-esque. You watch her fight where she won the Invicta Bantamweight title against Lisa Verzosa. And that's a different fighter than the fighter that normally fights, because for Stoliarenko, it very much is haha with a kick, reset, wait, bait your opponent in, try and land more shots. Against Verzosa, they both went balls to the wall. Verzosa had one of the nastiest cuts I've ever seen in my life. It wasn't like Song Yadong or it wasn't like Gregory Rodriguez, but it was in that avenue. So Stoliarenko looked really good there. She comes into the UFC. She loses to Kunitskaya in one of the oddest game plan fights I've ever seen. She loses to Julia Avila where she gets finished. She loses to Alexis Davis where she gets ground out.
That's when I jumped off the train.
Which could offer Chelsea Chandler a method of victory. But for Stoliarenko, she had 3 or 4 of the tightest armbars I've ever seen. It's just that old lady, Davis has some of the most flexible shoulder joints and elbows I've ever seen. For Stoliarenko, out of all of her submission wins, they're all by armbar, which might really kind of make you question things a little bit. So let's shift over to Chelsea Chandler. She does, of course, fight out of that Cesar Gracie gym. She was originally supposed to take on Leah Letson, but back in July 31st, it was announced that Stoliarenko was going to take the fight. So full camps for both of these women. I listened to an interview with MMA Sucka and James Lynch not that long ago from Chelsea Chandler while she was driving. Don't do interviews while you drive. The audio quality's never good. You gotta focus on the road. But what I will see out of it was this is what I gained. She's been training lots of armbar simulations. Lots of getting the fight to the mat and staying in that open guard and trying to land her own damage. She's been training at CSA Gym, which is where, oddly enough, Jessica Rose Clark trains. But some of the main training partners, Leslie Smith and Carrie Melendez. So a lot of speed and a lot of striking. The other thing that I have out of this one, and I am going to read this word for word. This is what Chandler said. She said, this fight's going to be a catchweight at 140 pounds. And when James Lynch pressed her, she said, we had found some medical issues. I've been having some issues with my thyroid. So that was kind of the reason why my weight wasn't going down at first. She would consider a move to 145 pounds. She's fought her last 2 fights at 145. Before that, at bantamweight. So an interesting one for Chelsea Chandler in this one.
I remember Kat Zingano had talked about that a lot when she had been cutting weight before she'd left the UFC. It just seems to be a problem that a lot of female fighters run into, unfortunately, but that's never a promising thing to hear when you do have a fighter being forced to take one of these weird catchweight fights, because other than the last pay-per-view that we just had, the UFC doesn't really like to do a lot of these catchweight bouts because in the grand scheme of things, they just mean the fight themselves matter a lot less because you don't really know what division rankings to put them under. But I could be 100% honest with this. I've had a bad read on Stoliarenko in her UFC career. I thought she was going to lose her last fight to Jessica Rose Clark. But the thing is, Jessica Rose Clark isn't good at defending submissions. So if you are going to beat her, submitting her via an armbar off your back is probably going to be one of the best methods. So for Stoliarenko, it's kind of like what I said between the fight between Grishin and Philipe Lins. Still an important fight, even though both fighters are coming off a win, and I look at this fight for Stoliarenko in a very similar capacity. You can't officially get your first UFC win and then go on to lose to somebody making their organizational debut. It's not the best look for Stoliarenko, but it will be interesting to see how she does decide to fight this fight, because I do expect her to have an advantage on the feet with some of her striking.
Really?
I do, and I know it is a lot of that car crash striking, but I just think that type of a striking can make what happens on the feet at least close enough to where the grappling is going to matter more than anything on the feet. I should say that. So for Chandler, I think she can have success, but I think this fight's primarily going to be contested on the mat. And if Stoliarenko is able to get that top position, I did talk about the arm bars a lot, which is a surprising stat. The fact that that's basically the only way that she does win via submission, but she does have good top control in her fight. She is a very tricky fighter off her back. We talked about Jessica Penne earlier on in the card. Penne is someone who's going to squirm a lot and try to make it very difficult for herself to be held down, whereas Stoliarenko is going to attack a lot more with some of her own submissions off of the ground. And I can just see this being an awkward fight where there's a lot of entanglements of a lot of limbs, and it's both fighters kind of going for their own stuff. And if it does result into one of those fights, I think it's going to be a really difficult one to score at the end of it. Because, again, if it's Stoliarenko going for submissions, Chandler's good enough to get out of it. Maybe she's able to land some ground and pound in the top position. I think we're just going to get a lot of even rounds in these two fights.
So Stoliarenko doesn't get a lot of top position in a lot of her fights.
I think in this matchup she can. Again, if anything's contested on the mat, I think she's going to be the much more active between these two fighters.
I think you have a bad read on this one. I think for Chelsea Chandler, growing up, our stepdad used to have a poster upstairs, and it had one Brian McCabe. You know exactly what it said. It said exactly, the best offense is a good defense. And for Chelsea Chandler, she lives life the opposite way. The best offense is more offense and more offense and more offense. Chelsea Chandler in her fights walks these women down, throws complete caution to the wind. If you like Leslie Smith fights,
they're just going to clinch because of that, I think.
You'll like Chelsea Chandler fights. She just throws and throws and throws and throws and clinches and gets the takedown, and then throws and throws, and then if he gets back up, she throws and throws some more. If you look at these fights that she's had, her last time out, she beats Courtney King by decision. The 2 wins before that, Brittany Victoria, she drops her twice, she gets a finish by knockout. Olivia Parker, she drops her, and as Parker's days, she gets her and submits her. In her fight against King, so that was her last fight against Courtney King. 50-50 on the feet. She does get kind of a little bit dazed in that one, and that was kind of the trouble that I had. The fight against Olivia Parker. I mean, she's dropping her with a left cross. She goes to the body quite a bit, which you do like to see out of her dips, but against King, I mean, it was the second round, she gets dropped by an awkward short left hand, and then she kind of pops back up, but she runs away and then gets hammered on a little bit more. Chandler, very, very active, very, very heavy with her takedowns, good top pressure. I think Chelsea Chandler is a lot better of a striker. She lands a lot more volume. She will get cracked, but she throws away all of her striking defense for all of her striking offense. Both of them car crash. Chandler has better wrestling, better top control, but I think Stoliarenko can take advantage when it does come to the mat.
I know, that's basically what I had said. I think, no, on the feet, you're right, but you're not listening to me. Chandler can be the better striker, but her type of striking is going to invite a lot of the grappling exchanges between these two. I still think we're going to see a lot of minutes for us Chelsea Chandler using her footwork, really pumping the jab on the outside, being able to extend a lot of these exchanges with her striking. I think her striking is going to get her into a lot of these clinch positions, and if that is how the fight goes, I think it's going to be a really close fight from that position, because Stoliarenko off her back, very dangerous, on top, very dangerous. If Chandler is just trying to go in there looking for the finish and being that aggressive fighter like we have seen, I do worry about her a little bit trying to tire herself out in that top position in the open guard of Stoliarenko. If Chandler isn't able to damage Stoliarenko enough to really be able to get the judges in her favor earlier on in this fight, I can just see the window for Stoliarenko winning by submission to become slightly more open and slightly more open as this fight progresses, because everything comes down to the touches with Stoliarenko. She's not somebody who's just going to go in there, dominate you with her grappling. It is going to come down to, okay, how are your arms in this exchange? How are your feet? And how's your base in some of these engagements? And that's where Stoliarenko can shine through. And that's why I do like her in some of these close range striking, or not just striking, but grappling exchanges.
Chandler has a nice record, and if you look at the level of opposition, she's 4-1. Out of all of it, 2-0, 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, and 4-2. So 15-2 is the combined record of her opponents. Look at the 15-2, go through those records. They are a little bit chintzy. I will just say that. And for Chandler, you beat a 38-year-old Olivia Parker here not that long ago. It is what it is. You're getting wins. You're winning the way that you should. Beats King not that long ago. They signed her directly to the UFC. The Letson fight was supposed to be what it would have been. And Letson hasn't win over Julija Stoliarenko, so there is that. But
that season of Tough did not produce the stars they thought, did it?
Well, Xiaonan hasn't looked great either. But we have a look at the odds. Stoliarenko open as the underdog, plus 130, minus 160. Chandler open as the minus 150. She's minus 106. When odds like that switch with unranked women's fighters, usually the underdog wins. So it could be good for Chelsea Chandler. But we have a look at the Topology votes. Matt, surprise us there to you. I'm going to say Nick Diaz Army represent. I'm going to say Chelsea Chandler gets the fan support over under 65% Chandler.
I think it'll be under 65.
It's going to be under. Oh, you salty
So
dog.
close.
676 total votes, 64% Chandler, 87% by decision for the 36% that have Stoliarenko, 42% by decision, 51% by submission. I think Julija Stoliarenko wins this fight. The reason being, I think the jiu-jitsu is the X factor. I know Chandler trains at a big jiu-jitsu gym. She cross-trains at all of these good gyms. The striking could win her fights in the UFC. It could also really lose her fights in the UFC. I look at Chandler in a fight against somebody like another unranked fighter, like a Jocelyn Edwards. She'd really struggle at that range against Edwards. Now, Chandler has the takedowns. Edwards struggles with the takedown defense, so Chandler could win there. But Chandler does hold her hands like down by her waist, between her chest and her waist, and just fire power strikes the entire time, and it's not a style that's conducive to longevity in the UFC. It could work at featherweight, because there's not a lot of featherweights. It could work at bantamweight, we could see, but I don't necessarily love it that way. I think I've had a read on Stoliarenko through the UFC, and I liked her against Jessica Rose Clark. I like her in this matchup against Chandler. I just think her jiu-jitsu can win her a fight like this, and car crash striking, Stoliarenko's chins, I think she's going to be able to get the win this weekend.
So do I. I think Stoliarenko's the much more dangerous fighter once it does hit the mat. I think Chandler can have some positions where she does have success in, but I think for the most part, Stoliarenko's going to be the one who's threatening with a lot more on the mat, and that's why I like her in this matchup.
Both of us going with Lithuania's Julija Stoliarenko to get the win, but if you like the Cesar Gracie product in Chelsea Chandler, let us know down below in the comments section. The fans certainly do. Big time fights coming up this weekend, including Rude Boy Randy Brown taking on Masaran Duba, Francisco Trinaldo, and in the main event, Dern versus Xiaonan. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.